Hey guys, welcome to this video. Today's video is going to be a quick and a short session focused on backends, just giving an overview of how backends and what backends mean within Terraform. So without any further ado, let's get started. So backend is a special kind of thing within Terraform, and what it basically means is that this informs Terraform how your state file should be managed. We're going to cover state file in detail in another video because that itself needs a dedicated session for it. However, just bear with me for the context of this video. Think of state file is basically a truth of what Terraform checked infrastructure or Terraform managed infrastructure exists in the real world, right? It's just a file. And backend is basically responsible or defines where that state file lives. Now we can have different types of backend within Terraform. Terraform gets shipped with a few different types of backend. So for example, local, this is the default one. So even if I don't define like a backend block in here, and I was to run Terraform init and then do a Terraform plan, Terraform would create a local backend automatically and create a terraform.state file automatically in my directory. So for example, just to show you in practice, so I go do Terraform plan, I've already done an init, and I'm setting the previous set back in local. So I need to do Terraform init, and this is what happens when it's best to see it in practice, I guess. So just because I had initially already run Terraform init to initialize with the local backends explicitly specified in the code. Now, since I've removed it, Terraform has already detected that there is a change basically in the existing state file, which is in here. So you can see that it already tracked all the infrastructure that I have in here and that I tried to plan previously in the state file. Now, since I removed the local backend in here, Terraform is detected change and is asking me if I want to migrate it, right? Now, the migration is really quite important if you are doing it, let's say remotely, I would say, or if you're moving from a local backend to a remote backend, right? But if you're not actually changing, like in my case, which we'll see in a bit, I'm actually not gonna do anything with the remote backend for now. I'm still gonna be using a local backend. Just instead of me explicitly specifying it, I want Terraform to infer it implicitly. But let's talk about remote backends for a bit. So remote backends, they work in this. For a remote backend, you actually do something like this, right? You do backend block as usual, but you do S3. Now this would basically use AWS's S3 service, or use basically a bucket within S3 to store the state file remotely. Now you can also do this with GCS, and you can also do this with Azure Storage account. What is the advantage of doing? And actually there are more you can do, right? There is like you can do console, and you can do remote and set up your custom backend at an organization, and you can also have an HTTP backend. So if I actually pull up the backends quick, this is not the one. I think this is the one you want to look at. No, let's go have a quick look at this. Just trying to find, there's a documentation on all the backend types that are natively supported by Terraform, and I just wanted to quickly show you guys that. Yeah, there, sorry. So these are all the backends that are natively supported by Terraform, and you can click on each of them to go and see how they work and how you can set it up, as there are more documentation behind it. I actually have a video where I show how to use AWS's S3 bucket as a remote Terraform's backend, basically to store the Terraform state remotely. And you can watch that video. It's in the same playlist for Terraform tutorials that this video is going to be. This video exists in as well, basically. and you can follow that along for a walkthrough on how to get started with the remote backend in AWS. And the rest all are fairly similar, just a different way to, pass in some of the key parameters, and their definition as well means slightly different, can mean slightly differently. But anyway, so coming back to the whole migration topic that I was on. Now, imagine you are already managing your Terraform infrastructure in AWS, but now, and your backend lives in AWS S3 bucket. Now, for some reason, you want to change that from S3 to somewhere else. Let's say, for argument's sake, to GCS, right? Your backend, your infrastructure lives in AWS, but your backend now goes and lives in GCP, in a Google Cloud Storage bucket. Now, at that point, you'd actually have to run terraform init-migrate-state. Running that would basically update the Terraform backend configuration, which is stored within the Terraform state file, to actually update the backend to now point to the GCS bucket that you specified in the new or the updated backend configuration. Now, if you don't want to migrate it, you just literally run reconfigure, basically, which is what I'm going to do. And then in my case, it's just going to initialize the backend, and it's still going to use basically the local backend. Now, why is it asking me for S3? Oh, of course, it's going to ask me for S3 because I think I previously put S3 and saved that. Now, if I get rid of this, and actually let's come out of it and reconfigure here. Now you can see that it's already picked up that I already have this providers pulled and installed in my cache, and it also again used the local backend, so you can see that I still have a Terraform state file locally. And one key important thing in here is that your backend can have some important access credentials, right? Especially the remote backends. Well, I guess mainly the remote backends, when you're working with them, you need to pass in some sort of access credentials so that Terraform can actually push the state file or pull the state file out from the remote backend. Now, make sure that you do not basically store any access credential information in your version control system. And always try to use Terraform init then backend-config as your, and pass in the access credentials. For example, for AWS, it would be a access key ID and a secret access key typically, if you're not using impersonation. And those details you can pass in as a secret from your CI/CD pipeline or through some automated process that you've got running. But please do not store them explicitly in the configuration file and push them up to version control, because that's a very bad practice, and anybody can can get hold of it, as in like anybody working in the team, which you do not want, as those secrets should be stored somewhere like Vault or some other secret management, whether in AWS or Google. Doesn't really matter, they all do the same thing. So depending on your scenario, make sure you put them in a secret manager. And lastly, just to sort of emphasize on the remote backends again. So the main advantage of remote backend is that it allows you to work with Terraform configuration in a collaborative environment, right? Because if you think about it, if you go with this local backend setup, the state file is stored in the directory, and in order to and you can work with the Terraform, right, locally, and you're running your plans, and let's say you've also run apply, so your infrastructure in the real world has actually changed based on the changes you have done through your Terraform code configuration. Now, since it's locally, it's not actually visible to another of your team member. And if they're also working in a similar kind of workflow where they've got a local backend, they're going to be creating infrastructure in Terraform that you're not going to have any knowledge about. And you can see that's a recipe for disaster, basically. Now, to avoid this, that's where remote backends really shine, because it's stored in a central place remotely, and everybody sort of interacts with that remote backend. And a lot of the remote backends supported by Terraform, such as AWS, GCS, and Azure, S3 Actually, S3 bucket doesn't come with built-in Terraform state locking. What is state locking? So state locking basically means that at a one given time, only one process can be running any sort of operation on the Terraform state file. This just ensures that concurrent processes are not trying to access the state file at the same time or trying to modify it at the same time. And this just basically ensures that there is no data corruption or any sort of failure being done from a Terraform state file point of view. Now, GCS, Google Cloud Storage, and Azure Storage Account, they natively provide a built-in Terraform state locking functionality, which means that you can guarantee that anybody that's working with the Terraform state file, right, running any sort of Terraform command, like whether Terraform NA, Terraform plan, or apply, if another process is already working with the same state file, then you're already going to get a failure, basically, from Terraform saying that, look, one process is already running, so you can't run it at the moment, so you have to retry it. With AWS S3, you don't get that. I go through that in detail in the video that I mentioned earlier about setting up a remote backend using AWS S3, so feel free to have a look in there for more information. And this is quite widely captured in Terraform documentation as well for backends. And the other obvious reason for using a remote state or a remote backend in Terraform is that these backends can usually contain sensitive information such as access credentials, right? Or even database passwords if you're managing databases to Terraform. And all that information you don't want to leave hanging around locally, and you also do not want to store them in version control, because then it's always going to be tracked through Git history, basically, even if you remove it or delete it. So the best practice is to really store them at a remote backend. That way you can ensure that only control individuals or control principals have got access to that state file, and there is basically very low surface area for leakage to happen for those sensitive information. And that's basically an overview of backends. If there are any questions, then feel free to drop them as a comment and I'll get back to it. But for now, thank you and appreciate you watching the video. Bye.